The doctor's hand trembled slightly as he slipped a folded piece of paper into my purse. His eyes never met mine. He only whispered, with a smile that didn't reach his face, "Take good care, Mrs. Whitmore, and remember, family isn't always what it seems." My heart froze. I didn't open the note until I was in the cab heading home. The city lights blurred past, but the words on that paper burned into my mind the moment I unfolded it. Don't go home. Run. For 70 years, I had lived in this country believing in family, in loyalty, in love. But that single warning shattered every piece of certainty I had ever known. I am Helen Whitmore, 70 years old, mother of a son I raised since he was abandoned at the age of 2. For decades, I sacrificed everything, my youth, my career, my dreams, to give Daniel the life every child deserves. I thought I had built a family filled with love, but on that Tuesday afternoon, inside a quiet medical office in New England, I discovered that my very own flesh and blood was plotting against me. By the time I stepped into my home, I could already sense it. Daniel, his wife Clara, and my granddaughter Sophia were huddled together in the living room. Their conversation stopped dead when they saw me. Clara shoved a stack of papers behind her back. Daniel forced a smile that never reached his eyes. And Sophia said, "That's great, Grandma. You'll be with us for many more years." Her words should have comforted me. Instead, her voice carried a coldness I couldn't explain. That night, the silence at the dinner table was suffocating. Daniel barely spoke. Clara answered me in clipped syllables, and Sophia avoided my eyes. The tension was so thick it pressed against my chest like a weight. I knew something was terribly wrong, and when I finally unfolded that paper alone in my bedroom, I understood. "Mrs. Whitmore, your family came to me yesterday. They wanted me to declare you mentally unstable so they could place you in a nursing home and seize control of your assets. Don't go home. Run." Dr. Jonathan Reed. The room spun around me, my son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter. The very people I had loved more than myself had betrayed me. What they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that I carried a secret powerful enough to destroy every one of their plans. I wasn't always a woman running from her own family. For most of my life, I was what every neighbor in our small New England town would have called the perfect mother. My name is Helen Whitmore, and I have lived 70 years in this country, believing in the sanctity of family. I married my late husband, Thomas, when I was just 24. He was tall, steady, a man who worked his hands raw at the factory so that we could build a modest life. We tried for years to have children of our own, but fate had other plans. Doctors whispered the word infertility, and for a long time, I thought that meant I would never know what it felt like to be called Mom. But then came Daniel. He was 2 years old, abandoned, his big brown eyes filled with fear and hunger the first time I saw him at the county foster center. Something inside me broke wide open that day. I reached out my hand, and when his tiny fingers clutched mine, I knew I didn't just want him, I needed him. From that moment forward, Daniel was my entire world. I poured everything I had into him. While Thomas worked overtime shifts, I stayed home, taking in sewing jobs at night just so I could afford Daniel's school uniforms and hot lunches. I told myself every sacrifice would be worth it. That one day he would grow up to be the kind of man who would honor the love that saved him. For 45 years, I believed in that dream. Even when Thomas passed away 10 years ago, I clung to Daniel and his family as the only thing I had left. They moved into my house, the same white clapboard home Thomas and I had bought after our wedding. At first, I was grateful. The silence of widowhood is cruel, and I thought having them there would fill the emptiness. Daniel, now a grown man, looked so much like the boy I once held. Yet sometimes, when I searched his face, I saw a hardness I couldn't recognize. Clara, his wife, arrived in our lives with a smile that never seemed to reach her eyes. She was sharp, ambitious, always dressed as if she were heading to a cocktail party, even on Sunday mornings. And then there was Sophia, my granddaughter. For years, she was my sunshine, the little girl who would run into my arms after school, her laughter echoing through the kitchen. But lately, that sunshine had dimmed. I noticed it in the way Clara kept her distance, always whispering with Daniel when they thought I wasn't looking. I noticed it in Sophia's sudden coldness, how she began to roll her eyes when I asked her simple questions, how she stopped joining me on our afternoon walks around the neighborhood. They said it was just teenage moods, but deep in my gut, something told me otherwise. Still, I brushed those feelings aside. Because what else could I do? They were all I had. My parents had passed decades ago. I had no brothers, no sisters, no close friends left. I had given up so much of myself to be a wife, a mother, a grandmother, that by the time I turned 70, my entire identity was tied to the 3 people who sat across from me at the dinner table every night. And yet, that Tuesday after my doctor's appointment, the cracks in the foundation became too wide to ignore. When I walked through the door, their hushed voices cut off mid-sentence. Clara clutched a stack of papers and shoved them behind her back. Daniel's smile was stiff, rehearsed. Sophia's eyes lingered on me with something I had never seen before, contempt. "Everything's fine, Mom," Daniel said quickly when I asked what they'd been talking about. His tone was casual, but I noticed his hand twitch against his leg. Clara wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophia, sweet Sophia, only said, "It means you'll be with us for plenty of time." Plenty of time. I told myself I was imagining things. That grief from losing Thomas, that age itself, had made me paranoid. But the truth is, I wasn't imagining anything. The house that once felt safe, the house I had built brick by brick through sacrifice and love, had become a cage. And inside that cage were 3 people I thought were my family. 3 people who were waiting for me to crumble. 3 people who had already decided how my story would end. The clock read 2:07 a.m. when the sound of muffled voices dragged me out of a restless sleep. For hours, I had been tossing in bed, clutching the doctor's note in my trembling hand, hearing his warning echo over and over in my mind. Don't go home, run. Now, wide awake, I realized the voices weren't coming from the television or the hum of the refrigerator. They were coming from the kitchen. I slipped quietly from my bed, my bare feet careful not to make the old wooden floor creak. My heart hammered so violently against my ribs, I feared the noise would give me away. Slowly, inch by inch, I pressed myself against the hallway wall until I was close enough to hear. Daniel's voice was the first I recognized. "The damn doctor wouldn't cooperate," he hissed, anger dripping from every syllable. I told him Mom is slipping, that she leaves the stove on, forgets who people are, but he just shook his head and said she was perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Can you believe that? Clara's voice cut through the darkness like a knife. Relax, Daniel. If this one won't sign the papers, we'll find another. There are plenty of doctors out there who don't mind bending the truth for the right price. What matters is timing. We can't let her last much longer like this. A heavy silence followed. Then Sophia, my granddaughter, my darling girl, spoke words that made my knees weaken. But what do we do in the meantime? I've already sent my deposit for college in California. I can't wait years for Grandma to die. I need the money now. The air seemed to vanish from the hallway. I pressed a hand against my mouth to keep from gasping. Daniel's voice returned, sharp, impatient. Don't talk like that. She'll be gone soon enough. But then, in a lower tone, he added, Still, you have a point. The house alone is worth nearly $500,000. With her pension and savings, we could live comfortably for years. Exactly, Clara said coldly. I didn't marry into this family to waste my youth taking care of a senile old woman. I thought we'd inherit quickly, but it's been 10 years since your father died, and she's still here, eating our food, spending what should already be ours. The venom in her words sliced through me. Ours? That house was built with the sweat of my husband's brow, with every sacrifice I had made, and yet they spoke as if I were merely a squatter in my own home, an obstacle to be removed. The conversation grew darker still. Tomorrow I'll meet with a lawyer, Daniel said. I'll ask if there's a way to have her declared incompetent without medical proof. There has to be a loophole, And if not, then we'll force her hand. We'll make her life so miserable she'll beg to go to a nursing home. How? Sophia asked softly, almost curious. Clara's laugh was cold and hollow. We'll strip away everything. Take her television, stop cooking for her, treat her like the burden she is. No one can endure being unwanted forever. Daniel hesitated, then lowered his voice. And if that doesn't work, we move to Plan B. My blood turned to ice. Plan B. What's Plan B? Sophia asked. Daniel answered with a calmness that chilled me more than his wife's cruelty ever could. We make her truly lose her mind, switch her medications, hide her belongings, tell her she did things she never did. In a month, any doctor will sign the papers. Then it's done. I staggered back, gripping the wall for support. The world tilted around me. They weren't just planning to take my freedom. They were plotting to destroy my very mind. Clara clapped her hands once, a sound of triumph. Perfect. Once she's committed, we'll have control over every account, every asset. We can sell the house, cash in her pension, and finally live the life we deserve. And no one will suspect a thing, Daniel added confidently. To the outside world, we'll look like the loving family sacrificing everything to take care of poor sick Helen. No one will question us. Their laughter rang out, a grotesque symphony of betrayal. They laughed at me, at my love, at my blindness. For decades, I had worked myself to the bone, believing I was building a family rooted in gratitude. And there they were, mocking me, plotting my destruction like it was a game. Clara's voice lowered, almost gleeful. Tomorrow morning, I'll copy her credit cards. We'll start draining her accounts a little at a time. She'll never notice. Good, Daniel said. I'll search through her files. There has to be a will. If there isn't, we'll make one. We can say she was confused, that she wanted to leave everything to us because we're her only family. That's genius, Dad, Sophia chimed in. But we have to be careful. What if someone suspects? No one will, Clara replied with utter certainty. She has no friends, no siblings, no one. She's a lonely old woman, completely dependent on us. Who would defend her? My body shook uncontrollably. They were right. I had no one else. I had burned bridges when I dedicated my entire life to raising Daniel. My parents were gone, my friends had drifted away, and the only family I had left was sitting in that kitchen, scheming to erase me. But they didn't know everything. They didn't know about the secret Thomas left me, a secret I had guarded for years, hidden even from Daniel. Offshore accounts, properties overseas, enough to ensure I would never be powerless. As I leaned against the wall, gasping silently for breath, I realized something had shattered inside me. It wasn't just my heart. That had broken the moment I read the doctor's note. No, what shattered now was my blind faith. My naive conviction that love, if poured out endlessly, would always be returned. It wouldn't. The truth was as clear as the note burning in my hand. My son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter had become my enemies, and I would have to fight them as such. I stood frozen in the hallway, long after their laughter had faded, clutching the wall to steady my trembling legs. My mind raced in circles, each thought more unbearable than the last. My son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, all of them united, not in love, but in betrayal. I returned to my bedroom on shaking legs and shut the door behind me as quietly as possible. In the dim light of the lamp, I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the dresser. My face looked pale, almost ghost-like, deep lines etched by decades of sacrifice carved across my cheeks. But my eyes, they were different. They no longer held confusion or despair. They burned with something else, resolve. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling open the small drawer of my nightstand. Inside lay a worn leather notebook, one I had not touched in years. My husband, Thomas, had given it to me the year before he died. In it, I had recorded every detail of what he left behind, things I had never revealed to Daniel or anyone else. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, my fingers steadied. The numbers and addresses written in my neat handwriting stared back at me. Offshore accounts, 3 properties abroad, securities Thomas had quietly built over the course of his life. It wasn't billions, but it was enough. enough to ensure I would never be the helpless old woman my family believed me to be. When Thomas died, I chose not to tell Daniel about any of it. I wanted my son to love me for who I was, not for what I had. I told myself that if I shielded him from the knowledge of this fortune, he would grow into a man independent and strong, a man who valued family above money. What a fool I had been. He had never loved me for who I was. He had only been waiting, patiently, hungrily, for what he believed would one day be his. The realization was sharp, but oddly freeing. For the first time in decades, I saw the truth of my life with clarity. I had poured my existence into people who saw me not as a mother, not as a grandmother, but as an obstacle standing between them and their comfort. I closed the notebook with a snap. My pulse no longer raced with fear. It pounded with determination. They wanted me weak. They wanted me broken. They wanted me to surrender. But I wasn't going to run as a victim. I was going to fight as a woman reborn. At 5 o'clock the next morning, while the house lay in silence, I packed. Not much, just enough to disappear without raising suspicion at first. My passport, identification, a few changes of clothing, essential medication, and most importantly, the notebook. I slipped my phone into my pocket, but before leaving, I activated the voice recorder. If my family wanted to build a case that I was losing my mind, I would build my own case, a fortress of truth. I tipped down the hall toward Daniel and Clara's bedroom. My heart hammered as I paused outside their door. Just as I had suspected, they were already awake, whispering urgently. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Clara's voice was sharp with worry. "Impossible," Daniel replied, his tone dismissive. "She's too old, too trusting. Besides, where would she go? She has no friends, no money of her own. We're all she has." I gripped my phone tighter, the recording capturing every poisonous word. "It's pathetic, really," Clara added with a laugh. "A 70-year-old woman completely dependent on us. Sometimes I almost feel sorry for her." "Don't," Daniel snapped. "She made her choices. She could have remarried after Dad died, built a new life, but instead she stayed here clinging to us. And now she'll pay for that." I had heard enough. Quietly, I moved away from their door, my recording secure in my pocket. They believed I had nothing. They believed I had nowhere to go. They believed I was powerless, and that was going to be their greatest mistake. At dawn, I slipped out of the house with a small suitcase and hailed a cab to the nearest bank branch. The young teller, a woman named Patricia with kind eyes, raised her eyebrows when I requested to withdraw $5,000 in cash. "Are you sure, ma'am? That's a considerable amount to carry around." "I'm very sure," I replied, my voice steady for the first time in days. "I have matters to attend to." After confirming the offshore accounts were untouched, I tucked the cash securely into my purse and left with my head held high. The world outside seemed different, sharper, louder, more alive. For years, I had walked the streets of this town as a grandmother, invisible and quiet, existing only in the background of other people's lives. But now, as the morning sun struck my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: freedom. My next stop was the Grand Imperial Hotel, the most elegant in the city. The receptionist, an impeccably dressed woman in her 40s, greeted me with professional courtesy. "How long will you be staying with us, Mrs. Whitmore?" I said, straightening my shoulders. "Helen Whitmore. I'm not sure. Perhaps a week. Perhaps several months. That will depend on how certain family matters unfold." Her eyes flickered with curiosity, but she asked no questions. Instead, she handed me the key to a suite on the 10th floor. When the elevator doors closed, I exhaled, long and deep. I wasn't Helen, the helpless grandmother, anymore. I was Helen Whitmore, a woman with resources, a woman with secrets, a woman with a plan. Inside the suite, I set my suitcase down and walked to the window. The city stretched out below me, buildings glinting in the morning light, cars crawling through the streets. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped. I wasn't waiting to die. I was planning to live. And more than that, I was planning to fight back. The morning after I moved into the Grand Imperial Hotel, I sat at the small oak desk in my suite, staring at my notebook. My handwriting, steady and neat despite the storm inside me, listed everything I needed to do. Each line was a weapon, each step a declaration that I was not the helpless woman they believed me to be. The first name on the list was one I had circled 3 times, Attorney Charles Harrington. That afternoon, I walked into the downtown office of Harrington and Associates. The reception area was all polished marble floors and hushed tones, the kind of place where justice didn't come cheap. I had chosen him for a reason. Charles Harrington was known across the state for his relentless pursuit of justice in cases of fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. If anyone could stand against Daniel and Clara's schemes, it was him. When he finally appeared, a tall man in his 50s with sharp blue eyes and a handshake firm as steel, I felt an unexpected wave of reassurance. "Mrs. Whitmore," he greeted me, gesturing to his office. "Please come in. I understand you have a delicate matter to discuss." "Delicate," I repeated bitterly as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "That's one way of putting it. My family is trying to declare me incompetent, forge documents, and strip me of everything I own." He raised an eyebrow, calm but attentive. "Do you have proof?" Without a word, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. The recording of Daniel and Clara's whispered conversation filled the room. "We'll switch her medications, hide her things, make her lose her mind." Harrington leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Mrs. Whitmore, this isn't just exploitation. This is conspiracy, elder abuse, fraud. If what you're saying is true, we can take them down, but I'll need every shred of evidence you can gather. Are you prepared for a fight?" I met his gaze without hesitation. I've been preparing my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. The next item on my list was to secure the eyes and ears I couldn't provide myself. Harrington referred me to Michael Grant, a former police detective turned private investigator. He met me the following morning at a discreet cafe near the courthouse. Grant was a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, the kind that had seen too much and trusted too little. But when he spoke, his voice carried the calm assurance of someone who got results. "Your lawyer tells me you've got a family problem," he said, sipping his black coffee. "That's an understatement," I replied dryly. "They're not just trying to take my money. They want to erase me." Grant leaned back, studying me. "I've worked plenty of cases like this. Families can be crueler than strangers, but you've got something most clients don't, proof. Recordings, a note from your doctor, financial trails. With your permission, I'll dig deeper. I'll find out everything about your son, your daughter-in-law, your granddaughter. The lies, the debts, the affairs, everything." "That's exactly what I want," I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. "I want the truth laid bare, no more secrets." 3 days later, Grant called me back to his office, a modest space cluttered with case files and corkboards filled with photographs. He slid a folder across the table toward me. "You were right to come to me," he began. "Your daughter-in-law Clara has been busy. We traced her social security number through several recent credit applications. She's opened 5 credit cards in your name without your consent. Total debt so far, $43,000. Jewelry, designer clothes, expensive dinners, even a trip to the Florida Keys." I gripped the edge of the folder. "The Florida Keys?" She told me she was visiting her sick mother. Grant nodded grimly. "They weren't visiting anyone sick. They were on a vacation, paid for with your identity." My stomach turned, but I forced myself to focus. "And Daniel?" Grant flipped to the next page. A photo of my son appeared, slumped at a bar. "He lost his job 8 months ago. Hasn't told you. Been surviving off your pension checks and Clara's fraud. Worse, he's racked up debts with a local bookmaker. Sports betting. Dangerous territory. He owes nearly $100,000. I pressed a hand against my chest. The betrayal stung, but the anger steadied me. "And Sophia?" Grant hesitated, then opened another folder. "Your granddaughter is pregnant. 3 months. The father's a married man twice her age. He's already backed out. She's been telling her friends she needs money to cover Grandma's medical care, just to borrow cash." The air in the room grew heavy. I felt the walls closing in, the truth pressing down on me like a weight. My family wasn't just planning betrayal. They were already living off lies, dragging my name through the mud. "Do you see now, Mrs. Whitmore?" Grant said gently. "They've been using you for months. This isn't about the future. It's already happening." I closed the folder and exhaled. "Then it's time we stop it." That evening, Harrington and Grant sat with me in the hotel suite. Together, we mapped out a strategy. "First," Harrington said, "we secure your finances. We'll notify every bank, every institution, that no transaction can occur without your personal appearance. Clara's fake credit cards will be traced back to her. That alone is enough for felony fraud." Grant added, "Second, we document every move they make. I'll place discreet surveillance near your home. If they try to sell your belongings, forge documents, or meet with suspicious contacts, we'll have it on record. And third," Harrington concluded, "we build a case strong enough to crush them in court. Recordings, financial trails, witness testimony. When we present this to a jury, they won't just lose your money, they'll lose their freedom." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small smile. Good, let them think I'm weak. Let them believe I'm sitting in that house, waiting to be carted off to a nursing home. By the time they realize what's happening, the trap will already be closed. The following day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping. Elegant dresses in black, emerald, and crimson. A new handbag. Shoes that made me stand taller. At the salon, a young stylist named Sophia, ironically the same name as my granddaughter, worked on my hair for hours. "Ma'am," she said softly, brushing color through my silver strands, "you have beautiful hair. Why hide it?" "Because for too long," I replied. "I thought I didn't matter, that my only role was to take care of everyone else." "Well," the stylist said with a grin, "those days are over." When she spun me toward the mirror, I hardly recognized the woman staring back. She looked powerful, untouchable, alive. As I walked out of that salon, dressed in my new clothes, carrying my new bag, I felt the city air differently. People glanced at me, not as a frail grandmother, but as a woman who commanded respect, and that was exactly what I needed to become, because the battle had begun, and this time I had allies. Charles Harrington and Michael Grant sat across from me in the hotel suite, a battle map spread across the coffee table, dates, notes, and copies of the evidence we'd gathered. "You can't stay on the defensive forever," Harrington said firmly. "To win, we need them to expose themselves. The public has to see who they really are. Once the world knows, they can't crawl back into the shadows." Grant nodded. "I've got a source. Daniel and Clara are desperate. They're trying to sell your house, the one in your name, using forged documents." A thin smile crept across my lips. "Perfect. Let's make sure I meet them, but not on their terms." On Monday morning, I walked into Richardson Realty wearing a sleek black dress, my freshly styled hair shining under the chandelier light. Rick, the realtor, greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you're interested in luxury properties. I've lined up 3 homes, each valued at over $1 million. "Show me," I said coolly. We were in the grand foyer of the second mansion, a place with wrought iron gates and roses trimmed like soldiers, when I heard voices near the entrance. 3 figures stepped inside, Daniel, Clara, and Sophia, dressed to impress, but the tension on their faces betrayed them. "We're here to sell a property," Daniel told another agent. "It's my mother's house, but she's very ill. We have the legal authority to act on her behalf." I descended the staircase slowly, my voice ringing through the marble hall. "Is that so, Daniel?" They spun around, eyes wide. Clara stammered, shoving a folder behind her back. Sophia stepped backward as if she'd seen a ghost. "Mom, you weren't supposed to be here." "I'm here for the same reason you are," I said coldly. "But there's one difference. I came to buy, not to steal." Rick looked puzzled. "Do you know these people, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Know them?" I let out a bitter laugh. "That's my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter. Or at least I thought so, until they decided to forge documents and sell my home out from under me." The room fell silent. Clients and employees turned, their expressions hardening. Clara jumped in quickly. She's confused. She hasn't been well. I pulled out my phone, tapped play. Daniel's voice thundered through the lobby speakers. We'll switch her medications, hide her things, tell her she did things she didn't do. In a month, any doctor will certify she's insane. The silence afterward was thick enough to choke on. Disgust swept across the faces of strangers. Clara shrank. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. Sophia's eyes brimmed with panic. At that exact moment, 2 attorneys from Harrington and Associates strode in with a notary. We represent Mrs. Helen Whitmore, one announced. Do any of you have a valid power of attorney over her estate? Daniel froze. Clara thrust out the folder, but the attorney flipped through the pages, then smirked. Forgeries. Worthless. I stepped forward, my voice sharp. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a loving family. This is a conspiracy. Gasps rippled through the lobby. One woman whispered, My God. Their own mother. I turned back to Rick. Cancel any dealings with them. My house isn't for sale. Not today. Not ever. That night, back in my hotel suite, I opened my laptop and launched a new live stream, A Grandmother's Truth. Good evening, I said, staring straight into the camera. My name is Helen Whitmore. I'm 70 years old. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about a family that looked perfect from the outside but was rotting from within. At first, only a few dozen people tuned in. Then hundreds, then thousands. I laid it all out, the doctor's note, the whispered plans in the night, the credit cards Clara had opened in my name, Daniel's gambling debts, Sophia's sudden cruelty. I played the recordings. I held up documents. The comments poured in. You're so brave, Mrs. Whitmore. What a vile family. Justice for this woman. My grandma went through something similar. Thank you for speaking out. When the viewer count passed 3,000, my phone rang. It was Sophia. I answered on speaker so the world could hear. Grandma, please stop the live stream, she begged. Everyone at school is watching. My friends, my teachers. Oh, you're embarrassed now? I said, voice icy. Did you ever think how embarrassed I'd be if you locked me away and stole everything I built? The chat exploded. Yes, expose them. Sophia's voice broke. I just needed money for college. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I leaned closer to the camera. You all heard that, didn't you? Direct from my granddaughter's mouth. This isn't paranoia. This is truth. Moments later, Daniel called. His voice was furious. Mom, shut this down. You'll regret it. Regret? I snapped. Or do you mean expose? Should I tell the 5,000 people watching right now how you paid a forger $50,000 for fake medical records? Should I mention that the FBI already has the evidence? Dead silence. Then the chat erupted. FBI, they're finished. Son, I said evenly, I gave you 45 years of my life, and you repaid me by plotting to destroy my mind. But the game is over. From now on, I'm not afraid of you. You should be afraid of me. I hung up and looked into the lens. This is just the beginning. Tomorrow, it goes even further. Stay tuned. You'll see justice play out with your own eyes. By the time I ended the stream, more than 7,000 people were watching. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Not as a victim, not as a weak old woman cornered by betrayal. I slept as a woman who had seized control of her own story. Tomorrow, the legal battle would begin, and this time, the whole country would be watching. The day of the trial came sooner than I expected. The courthouse was overflowing. Reporters crowded outside, cameras flashing at anyone who entered. I arrived in a simple but elegant black suit, calm and composed. Beside me walked Olivia, my granddaughter who once betrayed me but now chose to stand by my side. She squeezed my hand. Grandma, we can do this, I nodded. Just tell the truth, sweetheart. The truth will carry us through. At the defense table, Daniel and Clara looked like shadows of their former selves. Daniel had lost weight, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. Clara had caked on makeup, but it couldn't mask the gauntness of her face. They whispered frantically with their expensive lawyer, but fear clung to them like a second skin. On our side, attorneys Harrington and Grant stood tall, surrounded by stacks of files, recordings, photographs, bank statements, a fortress of evidence waiting to be unleashed. The prosecutor rose, voice resonant. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a simple family dispute. This is elder abuse, fraud, and a calculated conspiracy to rob a 70-year-old woman of her freedom, her dignity, and her life savings. We will prove beyond doubt that Daniel and Clara Whitmore sought to fabricate mental illness in Mrs. Helen Whitmore in order to seize her assets. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The defense lawyer countered smoothly. My clients are devoted children. They merely wanted to protect their mother, who has shown erratic behavior. We will show that Mrs. Whitmore's accusations are the result of paranoia, not reality. I kept my expression calm. They were still clinging to the lie of the loving, concerned family. Dr. Sterling, my longtime physician, was the first witness. I've treated Mrs. Whitmore for over 15 years, he said firmly. Her health is excellent. Her mind is sharp. Last week, her son and daughter-in-law asked me to declare her mentally incompetent. I refused because it was untrue. Gasps filled the room. Jurors stared at Daniel and Clara, who lowered their heads in shame. Next came Michael Grant, the private investigator. He presented photographs of Clara pawning my jewelry, Daniel at the bank attempting to access my accounts, and video evidence of their meeting with the document forger. This is irrefutable proof of an organized fraud scheme, he testified. Then Olivia stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she raised her eyes toward the jury. Olivia, Harrington said gently, tell us what you witnessed in that house. She drew in a shaky breath. I heard my parents plan to switch Grandma's medication to make her lose her memory. I heard them talk about forging a will, about selling her house behind her back. I kept recordings. I kept messages. They're all here. On the projector, a text message appeared. Clara writing, we need to push her into a nursing home this month. Can't wait any longer. A female juror wiped away tears. The defense attorney barked, isn't it true you're testifying for money? Didn't your grandmother promise you financial help? Olivia lifted her chin. No, she promised to teach me how to be strong, something my parents never taught me. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Clara broke down crying. Daniel slammed his fist on the table, growling, traitor! The judge banged the gavel. Order! Finally, it was my turn. I stood at the witness stand, spine straight, voice steady. For 45 years, I gave my son everything. I sacrificed my career, my friends, my youth, and in return, he and his wife plotted to strip me of my sanity, steal my money, and lock me away. This isn't just betrayal. This is cruelty. This is crime. I turned to the jury, meeting each pair of eyes. I don't ask for pity. I ask for justice, for myself and for every elder who has been silenced by the people they trusted most. Applause broke out in the gallery before the judge restored order. The defense tried one last angle. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you hid over $2 million from your family? Isn't this about secrecy, not abuse? I answered calmly. Yes, I had assets they didn't know about, but hiding money is not a crime. Fabricating dementia, forging wills, stealing from me, that is crime. Several jurors nodded gravely. Then came the recording. Daniel's own voice echoed through the courtroom. If this doesn't work, we'll just make her lose her mind for real. Switch her pills, hide her things. She'll go insane and the doctors will sign off. The room froze. Daniel slumped forward, face in his hands. Clara shrieked, it's all lies. But her voice cracked with panic. Olivia sat beside me, gripping my hand, tears streaming down her face. After 5 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for barely 2 hours. The verdict, guilty on all counts. Daniel, 12 years in prison for conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Clara, 10 years for fraud and financial crimes. When the judge read the sentence, Clara collapsed in sobs. Daniel stared blankly ahead, hollow-eyed. I exhaled, not with joy but with release. As I stepped out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Mrs. Whitmore, do you feel justice was served? I paused, then said, legal justice, yes, but more importantly, I discovered the truth. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, respect, and love. And today, I finally claimed my freedom. Olivia slipped her arm around me. The crowd, silent for a heartbeat, broke into applause. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. 6 months after the trial, the air around me felt lighter, as if the weight of 4 decades had finally lifted from my shoulders. I no longer lived in the old clapboard house where betrayal had festered in the walls. I sold it through a trusted realtor and used the proceeds along with my hidden inheritance to buy a smaller but beautiful home on the outskirts of the city. The new house wasn't large, but it was flooded with sunlight. French windows opened onto a sprawling garden where roses, lavender, and wild daisies danced with the breeze. It was the kind of home where peace was not just a dream, but a daily reality. Most afternoons, I could be found kneeling in the dirt, hands stained with soil, teaching Olivia how to care for the flowers. The same girl who once rolled her eyes at me now knelt beside me, listening intently as if every word were gospel. "Grandma," she said one afternoon, planting a seedling carefully, "do you ever regret adopting Dad?" I sat back, wiping my hands on my gardening gloves, my gaze soft on the horizon. "No," I said quietly. "I don't regret giving love. What I regret is not realizing sooner that love should never cost you your soul." She nodded, a shadow of guilt in her eyes, but also resolve. She had grown in ways I hadn't thought possible. Olivia graduated high school with honors that spring. Her teachers, once skeptical after the scandal, now praised her resilience. She walked across the stage in her cap and gown, one hand resting gently on the curve of her belly. She had decided to keep the baby. "I want to be better than my parents," she told me. "I want my child to grow up with honesty, with kindness, and I want to study law so I can protect people the way you protect me." Hearing that, my heart swelled. The girl who once mocked me at the dinner table had become the daughter of my heart, the daughter I had always wanted but never had. But my story wasn't just mine anymore. It had gone viral. The live stream I had started on a whim had grown into something I couldn't have imagined. I received thousands of letters from strangers, grandparents, mothers, fathers, people across the country who had suffered similar betrayals at the hands of their families. "Your courage gave me the strength to speak up. Because of you, I filed charges against my son for stealing my pension. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." The words were overwhelming. They also gave me purpose. With the help of Harrington and Grant, I established the Whitmore Foundation for Elder Protection. Our mission was simple but profound: to provide legal aid, counseling, and resources for older adults facing abuse, fraud, or neglect. The first time we held a public seminar, the auditorium filled beyond capacity. Seniors with walking sticks, widows with tear-streaked faces, men in worn suits clutching folders of legal documents, all of them came seeking help. As I stepped up to the podium, applause erupted. I wasn't just Helen Whitmore, the betrayed grandmother, anymore. I was Helen Whitmore, survivor, advocate, warrior. Every few weeks, letters arrived from prison. Daniel's handwriting scrawled across envelopes I never opened. Clara's letters smelled faintly of her perfume, the same scent that once lingered in my kitchen. I didn't need to read them. Some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. For a time, I felt a pang of grief for the son I thought I had, for the life I had once believed in. But grief gave way to something stronger: clarity. I had given him love, education, everything I could. What he chose to do with it was his burden, not mine. And forgiveness? Perhaps in another lifetime. But in this one, I chose freedom. At 71, I began living more fully than I had in decades. I traveled for the first time in years: New Orleans for jazz festivals, Colorado for the mountains, even California to dip my toes in the Pacific. I joined a book club filled with women half my age who treated me as a mentor. I learned how to paint again, something I'd abandoned when Daniel was small. Most of all, I learned how to be enough for myself. For too long, I had defined my worth by what I gave to others: my son, my granddaughter, my late husband. Now I discovered the joy of giving to myself. In the evenings, Olivia and I often sat on the porch swing, sipping tea while fireflies flickered in the garden. She would rest her head against my shoulder, her growing belly between us. "Grandma," she whispered once, "I'm scared. What if I'm not a good mother?" I kissed her hair. The fact that you're asking that question means you will be, because good mothers worry, bad mothers don't. She cried softly and I held her, knowing that together we had broken the chain. If someone had told me a year earlier that my greatest heartbreak would become my greatest rebirth, I would have laughed in disbelief. But life has a way of teaching us in the harshest, most unexpected ways. I learned that family is not blood. Family is loyalty. Family is respect. Family is love freely given and returned. I learned that sometimes being alone with dignity is better than being surrounded by betrayal. And I learned that it is never too late. Never too late to fight back. Never too late to reclaim your life. Never too late to begin again. Now, as I prepare to welcome a great-grandchild into the world, I know one thing for certain. I will make sure that child grows up knowing the truth, that love must never be twisted into chains, that kindness must never become weakness, and that every person, no matter their age, deserves to live with dignity. Every night before I fall asleep, I give thanks for three things. For Dr. Sterling, who had the courage to slip me that warning note, for my own strength, which I never knew I had, and for the discovery that endings can also be beginnings if you have the courage to write your own story. At 71, I am not just surviving, I am thriving. And for the first time in my life, I am free.